Hello YouTube friends, I'm Jeanette and today we're in the kitchen. And I'm going to talk to you about a subject that's a little bit taboo, but I think it needs to be talked about in today's society, in today's situation that we find ourselves in. You know that if you're a canner, that lids have been kind of hard to find this summer. I was fortunate enough to come up with enough because I had some big long sleeves like this is 29 dozen that I bought from my local Amish bulk food store over the time period that, however long I've been buying them. And then they also had some wide mouth that they were breaking down to a point where you could only get 4 dozen at a time, or then you could only get 2 dozen at a time, and you could only buy one of those packages. The supply was so low, and I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with that over the summer, because on Facebook I see so many people who have said that they couldn't find lids, or that if they found them in a store like Walmart or Target or their local hardware store or something like that, that they would just buy everything they could find, jars and lids. I made it through, and partly because I also bought some one-piece lids from the Amish bulk food store. The lids look like this. They're gold and they're high heat. These are meant for pressure canning, and I think they have this silicone seal around the outside edge, and this little top that pops down whenever it's pulled down for the seal. And so I bought a case of 1,000 of these, which ought to last me quite a while. So I was able to get through with my canning. Now I still have some chicken to can, and I like to can things off and on over the winter too, so I still need a supply of lids. Now I understand that the bulk company has put out a letter or a notice that they're going to be in full force of making canning lids again, and that we should have enough canning lids by next spring again. Now we never know, the way things are these days. I mean, COVID showed us that we never know what's going to happen, because nobody expected anything like that. And so I just want to talk to you about saving your lids. Now I know that it's kind of against the canning police rules to save your lids, but I have saved lots of lids and reused them for canning. And I'm going to show you what I do and how I recommend to you that you handle the lids so that you can depend on them the next go-round to get a good seal and to be safe with your canning. Now I have some lids that I've saved up for a little bit that came off of various things, and some of them were pressure canned and some of them were water bath. I'm not saving, and I don't make a distinction between the two whenever I save them. And so what I'm going to do is fill this little bowl with some hot soapy water. And I'm going to let them soak for like 5 or 10 minutes. If you want to save your lids, the first thing you need to do is be careful about how you take the lid off the jar. Now what I'm going to do here is look at my lids. This one, I canned it in 2017, but it still looks all nice and new and in good shape. This is tomatoes. Now this is ground venison, so I know it was processed for a long time at 10 pounds pressure, but that lid on the surface looks very nice too. But this is chili beans that I just processed last year, and this lid has some rust on it, like corrosion. I guess you might call it corrosion or rust. So I don't know whether I'm going to want to keep that or not. I'm going to open it up and see what it looks like on the inside. So when you open your lid, you have to be very careful. People might commonly want to use an opener like this, that's like a beer opener. This end is pointy and this end is more rounded, dull. But the problem with this is that if you catch the lip of your jar, where you screw the lid on, and this, I actually know about this because I did it before, and lift it up like that, you can break your jar. You can break the edge of your jar off like that. And so not only ruins your lid, but it ruins your jar. But even if you're careful doing this, it puts too much pry on the lid, and almost always it pokes it in here and bends it up here. So I don't recommend using an opener like this. What I recommend is using a spoon. And to do this, what I do is lay my thumb here and use the spoon as a lever. So I'm going to put my thumb up against the edge of the jar here. I'm going to put the spoon under the edge of the lid and I'm going to pry. See, it popped right up. Now sometimes they're sealed down really hard and you might have to go around and do several pries to get it off. But now if you look at this lid, it's perfectly fine. There are no bends in it anywhere. Now I've seen people use knives to do this. I mean, I haven't seen them do it. I've heard of them doing it, but I think it's the same principle basically. But this has always been the best way for me to get the lid off. So this lid looks fine. Of course it's dirty. It's got the tomato stuck to it a little bit. Now let's check out the venison. It came up pretty easy too. Now this one, when I did it, it actually bent a little bit right there. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little bend right there. Now I feel like I can safely just bend that back. It didn't affect the top surface, but I just bent that little pulled out part right there and it's fine. So then we're going to do the beans and see what that looks like. Okay, so on the inside it's got all the bean residue, which is no problem. That all washes off. I didn't know, because this one was rusted on the outside, if it would look like that on the inside, and it doesn't. Now the groove that the top of the jar made in the rubber is pretty deep, so this is something we want to look at. We're going to get these washed up. And in the meantime, I'll get these jars dumped into a pot and we'll have some chili for lunch. These were black beans that I seasoned with chili powder and canned. It's really handy to have all that right ready to go into a pot and heat it up pretty good for maybe, you know, an hour, so all the flavors can meld. And chili, instant chili. Add a few more seasonings if you want. After they've soaked a little bit, we'll take a look here. I like to use a soft toothbrush because I don't want to have any little particles stuck to the rubber part. I want it to all be clean. And now I don't want to rub too hard, but I want to make sure these are perfectly clean. Now the older lids, I think, were made better because the rubber part was better made, and I think overall they just lasted better, which is the way things go these days, you know. So as I go along, I'm going to give a light scrub to each one of these lids around the rubber and on that surface, and make sure they're clean and look as best I can at them. And here's another thing that they used to tell you is to boil your lids before you use them. Now they don't say that anymore. They just say to put them in warm water before you use them. So you might run across people who say to boil them, but I'm not going to boil them. I'm only going to give them a good wash. And I don't believe in the bacteria problem that you might think would be there, because that's what the canning process is for, is to get all kinds of bacteria killed in your canning. The only thing that I think you need to worry about is having some little particle that could be on this rubber part, or some rust that you would want to avoid. And then you need to worry that the rubber part is still good and it can still have enough power, I guess I'll use the word power, enough substance to go ahead and shape down to the jar again. Now I've talked to Amish ladies, especially one Amish lady that I'm going to reference, and she would use her lids up to 6 times. And every time she would put the date on it and leave the date. So if you do it at the magic marker, a Sharpie, it can stay on there if you're careful not to wash it off. Every time she would use it, she would write the date on it. Even if it was the same year, she would write it again until it got to be 6 times, or else it got to be where the lid was not in good shape anymore. This obviously came off the tomatoes because it's stained red. But in my mind, in my opinion, that stained red doesn't matter as long as there's no particles on there that's going to cause you problem. Just make sure it's sound, and make sure your rubber is clean and in good shape. And here's another thing. I am against washing them in the dishwasher because I think that the dishwasher is too hard on them. I think it's going to ruin your metal. It's going to take any kind of coating off of your metal that might have been on there protecting it. And I think it could dry out the rubber too much. I'm going to give these all a good rinse. My water's not so hot that I can't put my hands in it. And then I'm just going to set up a situation where I can set them at an angle and they have plenty of area for the air to get to them. Just let them air dry. And then I've designated a corner in one of my kitchen drawers where I'll just keep them stacked up in there away from anything else that might do some damage to them, and they'll be ready there for me to use. One reason I decided to do this video today is because I have 7 jars on my counter that I've emptied, and when I do that I usually just fill them up with beans and can a batch of beans. And what I do is simple. I just put 1 cup of dry beans into each jar, a teaspoon of salt, and then I fill it up to 1 inch with water. And I wanted to use my used lids today, so I got them all washed up, and I'm going to slap them onto these jars and get them processed. Canning isn't rocket science. It's really very simple. All you need to do is follow a few rules and you're perfectly safe, as long as your equipment is all good and you pay attention. Okay, I'll be processing these beans for 90 minutes at 10 pounds pressure. Now, I realize that not everybody is going to be comfortable with this, and I fully realize that it is against the canning rules as laid out in the Ball Blue Book. And so you don't need to tell me in any kind of comments that I'm breaking all the rules. But I know from my own experience that this works, and I know from my own experience that we could reach hard times. And if we do reach hard times, then it's good if you know that you can reuse your canning lids so you aren't left high and dry with no canning lids and something to can. Since I didn't have any other canning to do, I just let my canner cool down all the way. So I'm just going to show you that every one of my jars sealed. And there you go. So happy canning to you. Be safe, be wise, and take a few risks. See you next time.